change with her.
Yikes. Right, so I grew up in upstate New York. I was born actually in Queens. My father was in the Army when I was born in Korea. And we moved to upstate New York when I was 4 years old because my parents wanted me to have a more rural lifestyle when I grew up. So I grew up at that time it was pretty rural. It was about an hour and a half upstate from New York City, but it was pretty rural.
Would you like to sit down in the chair?
Oh no, that's okay, I prefer to stand. Is that okay?
Sure.
Both my grandparents were union workers. My grandfather on my mother's side started the Brewers Union at Rheingold Brewery when his father, his good friend was killed by cleaning a beer vat out when he was on the job. And then both my parents were union workers as well, and my mother was vice president. She retired a few years ago of SEIU 1199. She's an emergency room nurse most of the time when I was growing up, and she was responsible for winning one of the historic settlement cases in the state of New York for nurses' rights, the biggest settlement there had been. And so I grew up knowing, in a middle-class family, working-class family, and really didn't understand that I was learning a lot about how to advocate for people, and I learned a lot about how important it was to fight for women's rights in the workplace, and without really knowing, I just thought, when you're a kid, you just think everything your parents do is what everybody else knows, so you just don't realize it. And that actually became a big part of what when I got started in this cancer cluster issue, I started New Hampshire Safe Water Alliance, and immediately was advocating with people, collaborating, forming a coalition to work on some of the legislative and important issues before I was even elected. That's called New Hampshire Safe Water Alliance, and it's a group on Facebook, and it's now about 700 people, so it's a pretty big group. Growing up, my mother was very supportive of me being a science nerd that I was growing up, and I would pick up rocks on family vacations all the time and put in my bag. And I remember one time when I came back from a trip out west, I had a backpack full of rocks. My father picked me up at the airport and picked it up. He said, "What's in here, rocks?" Actually, yes. But he knew that by then. It was something I did. So I went to Syracuse. Went to Syracuse as a computer science major at first because that was the big thing then in 1981 when I graduated from high school. And I didn't like it, so I called my mom up one day and I said, "I really don't like this computer science stuff. What can I do?" "Well, you've always liked rocks, so why don't you try a geology class?" So I did, and I loved it, and that became my major. So she was always very supportive of me being a woman in science, and she wanted me to follow my instincts and my desires to be a scientist and be what's the word I want to use?
Motivated.
Self-motivated, yeah, or being able to take care of myself. As a woman. So I went to Syracuse, graduated, and then my chairman of my department, when I was trying to figure out where to go, I had applied up here to UNH and a few other schools, and I couldn't figure it out. He said, "The mountains, Boston, and the seacoast, that's your place." And I was like, "You're right."
Wow.
So I came up to UNH, and I've never basically left. I left for a short year. Right before I got married, my husband got transferred to Chicago. But I was so homesick that I came back, and I was so happy to come back. We lived in Newburyport for a little while and then moved up here, bought a house in Portsmouth. So I've lived here for 33 years and have two boys now, 15 and a half and 20. And my son is going to BU for classics and political science.
Ooh.
And he's very active on the Exeter, on the Rockingham County Executive Committee. He actually got more votes than I did in the election, and so I'm very proud of him. He's
gone negative early.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Right. That's so funny. But he's very active in politics. He's actually working on my campaign now.
Can you pull the other one down?
My younger son is the science guy. My older son is the classics and artsy political science guy. My younger son is the science guy. Wants to be a pilot and gives me all my gray hair that I have here because he likes to fly solo gliders. He's really good at it, and he just has the mind for for airplanes and things. So I'm amazed by him. But so I have been for about a year and a half after I graduated, left UNH. I was a math and science teacher, math and language arts teacher at Hampton Academy Junior High School for disadvantaged children. And then I got a job in the environmental science field. Been doing that for 30 years. The last 20 years I've had my own business until I had this happen with the cancer cluster stuff. So I was operating my own small business, woman-owned SBA certified business, which was great. I was a contractor. I had a variety of my own clients, but I also was a Defense Department contractor, which was what got me to understand a lot of the stuff that is going on now, actually. The first time I'd ever heard of PFCs was back in 2011 when we identified them on a Navy base up in Maine. That I was the project manager for all of the sites, 30 sites at the base. I was the manager for the Navy at that site. So it's been a long history of this environmental science work, but back in 2013, I can't remember exactly when, but a few years ago I decided to go back to school. I had actually a family member who had very serious neurological, my stepfather, issues, and my mother just could not figure it out, so I sort of threw myself into trying to figure out what it was and try to help her, and that got me thinking that maybe I should do something else, because I really like science, and not just the toxins in the environment science, but I want to understand public health. So I went back to Georgetown, and I just graduated 3 weeks ago or so from Georgetown with a master's degree in clinical science.
Good for you.
So, thank you. And that actually was very helpful, because right when I was doing that, when I started doing that degree program, was when this cancer cluster issue came up in the Seacoast. And the way it was reported to me were one of my children, my younger son, came home from elementary school and said, boy, the kids at school are talking about these other kids that are really sick and they have cancer, and kids are really worried about it. And a few days later, my girlfriend called and she said, you know, moms are really worried. These kids all have the same kind of rare cancer, which is really weird, isn't it? And isn't there an environmental issue possibly that could be causing this? And is it a problem? And when I looked at it, I had just gotten done taking a bunch of classes like epidemiology, so I understood what a cancer cluster was, and I knew that it met all the bars that you had to meet to be a cancer cluster, which is actually really hard to do. I mean, oftentimes, you know, even in the case of the civil action, I don't believe that was actually an official cancer cluster. So it met the 4 criteria for a cancer cluster, so I reported it in 2014 to the state. And it took 2 years of prodding to get the answer back. And in early February 2016, they called myself and another mother to the library in Rye, and the Department of Health and Human Services told us it was a cancer cluster, but we were going to just sort of wait and see what happened. And I was like, after 2 years of fighting to get the answer, you're going to tell me you're not going to do anything about it? You know, I was just shocked, and I knew that, you know, because everybody was so upset in town, like I kept getting these moms, have you heard yet? Have you heard yet? You know, so I knew that wasn't going to be the answer for us. So I said to them, I'm an environmental scientist. Come on, you can take blood samples, you can take water samples, you can take soil samples, you can do something, figure something out. And they said, no, we don't want it. There's things like, you know, we don't know what we're going to sample for, that, you know, you have to kind of know what you want to sample for. But I said, I'll give you a list, do it. You know, I'll tell you where to start. And they said no. So I went away from that meeting just really upset. I remember talking to the other mom that was there and saying, this is total, you know what. And so a couple of days went by, and at the very same time, that was when the whole Haven Well thing was happening at Pease. And there had been a reporter, Jeff McNamee, who was doing a really good job, I thought, of reporting, investigative style reporting on it, and not being inflammatory, but just really, you know, the facts. So I decided to call him anonymously and report it, and told him where to find the report on the state website, and he did that, and the next day it was in the paper, and then it blew up. And the people in the town, you know, were upset because even the mothers whose kids had cancer were not told about the cancer cluster being a cancer cluster. So everybody was really upset. They had a series of meetings, and Governor Hassan formed the task force. I was asked to sit on the task force because I had reached out in that 2-year time frame to our rep at the time, who was Dr. Sherman, who's now running for Senate again. So, you know, he knew that I was an environmental scientist. I knew about it, so they asked me to be on her task force. She asked me to be on the task force, and we got started looking at some environmental issues. And the biggest one that first came up was this Coakley Landfill. And I could go on for a long time, it's very complicated, but it's basically an unlined landfill that was just covered in 1986 or whatever it was, and left behind with all these toxic things in it. I went and looked through 15 file boxes that the state has. And there's so much stuff in there. There's chemical companies from Massachusetts, there's, you know, the Navy put stuff in there, the Air Force put stuff in there. So it's just a toxic dump of just, we don't even know what's in there. Basically has been sitting there sort of, you know, over time there were supposed to be what's called institutional controls, where nobody was supposed to put wells in around the landfill, but they have over time. They forgot about that. There's golf courses on all three sides that draw the water out from under the cap, and then all of these, you know, residences, developments have been put in with all private wells and irrigation systems which actually draw a lot of water. So it's actually now pulling all the stuff out from under the cap. So that's where we are right now. We're continuing to look at it. Up till today, we're still working on a lawsuit I filed on behalf of some legislators to look at, to get the information from the Coakley Landfill group so we can figure out what's going on. So that's ongoing right now. And there are some other environmental issues we've been looking at, but basically, I was elected in 2016 mostly because of all the work I was doing on this issue. That's what I think, and it's a Republican district, but I was the top vote getter out of Portland. And when I went to Concord, I knew, you know, so first of all, I was never going to be a politician, no way. I was a scientist, a mother, you know, a business owner. And when Dr. Sherman told me right at the time after the task force had been formed that he was going to run for a Senate seat, which he's doing again, he said, I think you should run for my seat. And I was like, you're nuts, because I'm not, you know, I'm not a politician. He said, no, we need scientists in policy making. And, you know, the more I thought about it, the more things I had learned, I knew he was right. So I decided to file, and then I won. And I went to Concord knowing that there were some important things that I had to do, and I put in 4 bills right away. Those were drinking water protection, looking at the cancer cluster, continuing to look at it, and then to look at ways to really prevent clusters across the state. Or Gore-Tex fabric that were at the Haven well, which was what has caused the Haven well to shut down. So all of those bills I put in right away when I got there, and the minority leadership said, wait, you can't do that, you're a freshman, you got to take them out. And I was like, no. And they said, okay, well just focus on one of them. And I said, nope, I can't. I'm going to do all of them, you guys really don't know me. So I actually did get them through. I went to Jeb Bradley as one of my first meetings to look at who I'd get to sponsor the bill, and I went up to his office, went and had an appointment with him, and he signed on to all of my bills. And I came down and saw I walked down to Rennie Cushing, and I saw him on the way. He goes, where have you been? I go, talking to Jeb Bradley. He's like, what? And I said, yeah, I just got him to sign on all of my bills. He's like, you did what? He's like, you're what? Because he's the Senate majority.
This is pretty astounding, actually.
I want some of that secret sauce.
So, you know, I went on to pass all of them, and three of those bills. And the 4th one was tabled the first year in finance. And then the 3 bills have now gone on to form these commissions that are working very hard on all these issues. Very important drinking water protection issues. 2 of the biggest wells on the seacoast are shut down now from contamination, Haven and one in Hampton. And so we're doing a lot of important work to try to make sure we prevent things like this from happening in the future. And now in the second session, before this even came up that Carol was retiring, I had put in an anti-hate resolution over the summer because I was very concerned about the lynching of this 8-year-old boy in Claremont. And all the things going on a national level and across the state, the anti-Semitic things that have been happening. And I just said, this is enough, you know? So I wrote this resolution. I spent quite a lot of time on it in the summer. And the very first day I could put it in, I put it in. And then there was like an outpouring of support. Jeb Bradley signed on to it, Dan Innes signed on, all these Republicans, all these Democrats, and I thought, wow, this is really interesting because, you know, here we are, we're in the middle of this Trump issue going on, or Trump administration, and all this nasty stuff you hear about all the time, but yet all of these Republicans are signing on to this bill. So I had to add a permanent extension, a journal extension onto it, so other people could sign up, because I literally had to turn Democrats away. I mean, they were starting to get, some of the Democrats were getting really mad, like, I want to be on this, but I can't let you because all these, you know, so, and it's always good to have a balance of Republicans and Democrats, especially when you're not in power. So that I've learned, you know, that helps to get them passed. So That bill passed 239 to 65 across the House floor, which was amazing because, you know, that's a tough thing to do in the situation that we're in right now with not having a lot of control over the houses, the House or the Senate or the governorship.
What's the bill number, just so?
HCR 13,
HCR.
House Resolution 13. So that's one of the bills. And then there were a series, I wrote 18 bills over the summer, and then a total of 41 bills, I think 23, whatever that difference is, other people asked me to work on with them. And so they were environmental bills, but there were also things like protecting wages and reimbursement for children of families that are, you know, what do you call it? I can't think of the word, but I lost my brain. But protecting wages for children for reimbursement, single payer health care I worked on a lot. I did protecting this. There's severely mentally ill people in the state of New Hampshire are housed in a state prison, which is just horrendous. And I'm on that bill, and we are still working. Unfortunately, the bill got killed, but we are trying to. There's been a federal lawsuit filed. There are probably 2 more coming right now. And we did a protest march to the courthouse to try to raise awareness. And I think we are at the point now where something is going to happen. I really feel confident that we've put enough of a shine light on it that something's going to happen.
It's shameful.
It's horrendous. It gives me goosebumps to think about what happens. The other things I've worked on were a bill that was intended to prevent public universities from spending money, publicly funded money, on union busting firms, which UNH did. They spent $200,000 to hire the premier union busting firm so that they could prevent staff members from unionizing at UNH. So how do you feel about state universities spending public money on union busting, you know, preventing our workers from having rights in the workplace? So a variety of different bills, and then when Carol Shea-Porter decided she was going to retire, it was really a surprise to everyone, at least to me it was, and you know, immediately a couple of men jumped in, and I thought, I was at a party, I remember specifically, we had a progressive summit up at Andy Walensky's house up in up near Tilton, and we're sitting there, and these 2 guys are saying, oh, we're doing it, and I'm like, wait a second, this has been a woman's seat for a long time, you know, I think there's a place for a woman progressive in this. And I took aside the other woman leader that was there, and I said, look, I really think that there's, you know, possible, and she's got to go for it. So I thought about it for a while longer and realized, you know, I'm worried about what's happening with the EPA. I mean, we are seeing how science is being dismantled. We're seeing how, you know, climate change data is being stripped off of websites and pretending that climate change doesn't exist. And it's just the way that science and evidence and facts and logic and all these things that we need to protect public health are being dismantled. And the way that it's being done, you know, basically affecting people that are disadvantaged. I mean, the Flint water crisis, it started during the Obama administration, but still 4 years later, they don't have clean water there. No. And it's amazing with the public outcry that happened, how little has changed. So these are things that are really important issues, and I think that, you know, we need to put more scientists in Congress, because there's only one scientist in Congress, and this is a funny joke, but it's true. He talks about in the press being lonely, and I can see why, because he's fighting these battles all by himself, and there's no logic there. So, you know, I think this is really important. The Department of Defense calls climate change and drinking water contamination the 2 top threats to our national security. And I've talked at length with people that are higher up in the government that have been involved in the Department of Defense that tell me things that, you know, 65 million people across the world are on the move right now, are refugees, and it is the backdrop for some of the conflicts that are ongoing, like Syria, the Syrian conflict, and they predict that by 2035, if not before, 400 million people will be on the move in the world from climate change issues. They're going to be struggling to find places to live. They're going to have to leave their places to live. They're going to be struggling for food, for clean water. We saw in Puerto Rico when these storms happened that they had to serve you know, water from a Superfund site to the people because they had no water. In Texas, we had all those storms recently, and chemical tanks were exploding. You know, so we need to plan ahead for these things. We can't just pretend it's going to go away because they're stripping the information off of websites. It's not going to stop. You know, we're going to see storms with increasing magnitude and frequency. We're already seeing, I just was at a BU Public Health symposium a few weeks ago, And in LA County, the vector-borne disease season has extended 2.5 months already due to climate change, which tells you, I mean, and so that is resulting in more deaths associated with, you know, certain diseases and things that are vector-borne diseases, you know, mosquito-borne and things like that. And, you know, I think we're already seeing the impacts with the ticks here. We're having some of the, you know, some of the areas of New Hampshire are being particularly impacted by very large numbers of ticks. So there are, you know, a variety of things that we're not especially noticing are happening already. The maple syrup in the state of New Hampshire used to be 80% from New Hampshire, 20% from Canada. Now it's 20% New Hampshire and 80% from Canada. And there are scientists that are looking at what's happening to our maple trees already. So there's a variety of things that, you know, we need to plan for. We need to plan for emergencies. You know, we saw how the waves were rushing over Route 1A and Rye over this past winter, and I got phone calls from people saying, what am I going to do when the tide comes in at 2 o'clock in the morning, you know? And what can you do? You have to get out of there. I mean, we can't hold the ocean back for much longer, so we can't just pretend that these things are not going to impact us. We need to plan for them. And part of my training in the environmental science field for 30 years has been emergency response training, so I understand about that, things about that. So I think I'm best prepared in this group of candidates to be able to fight for these things and to bring science back to Washington. But that's not the only thing. You know, I think that growing up in a union household, I believe we need to increase the wages to be more livable for people. I'm worried about families that in New Hampshire are $400 away from bankruptcy if there's a serious illness in the family, and they're working 3 and 4 jobs to make ends meet. So that's a criminal thing. I think that, you know, Medicare for all is the way we need to go. I think it's going to save a lot of money. You know, don't listen to anybody that says you can't do it. We can do it. It will save $476 billion in administrative costs in the first year. It will save $176 billion in reduced pharmaceutical costs, because the base to which from which we can negotiate from will be larger. So I think it's criminal that we spend so much money on healthcare here in the United States, and yet we have people who are not covered or inadequately covered. Our premiums are tremendously, you know, I don't even want to know what my premium is. I don't even ask my husband. I mean, and you know, and that's another point. A small business owner, I was able to leave my, you know, corporate job to start a company. I spent most of my, you know, I was in the house when my kids were little and working as a mother in the house. I could be around them. I had people help me, but I could do that because my husband had a good job with medical insurance. He could never leave his job because he had to have the medical insurance. Yeah. So, you know, I think this would do a lot to spur innovation in our state. It would allow people to leave their jobs, start their own companies, feel empowered to do what they want. And I think it's the backdrop for things like our opioid crisis that, by the way, is the same rate of death this year, overdose deaths, as it was last year. We heard that was going to go down, but it has not. It's the same, exactly the same, 485 deaths last year, 487 this year.
Did I read that I don't mean to interrupt you, but I think I was reading your bio, and your work for your master's at Georgetown had something to do with the opioid?
Yep, it's looking at medical cannabis. So on my Health and Human Services Committee assignment, we did a lot of work in the last 2 years expanding access to medical cannabis for severe pain, chronic severe pain. So now there's a direct pathway. If you have chronic severe pain, you can, moderate severe pain, you can access medical cannabis. And we got that passed because I set up meetings at alternative treatment centers for us in the Criminal Justice Committee. We went to visit them. We had interviews with 30 to 40 people at these centers, asking them what they thought about medical cannabis, and we heard the most amazing stories about how it got them off opioids, how it improved their overall health. Wow. They lost weight, they were able to walk, just the stories that we heard. And these are the veterans, and you know, these aren't people that were, you know, necessarily you know, apt to be you know, disabled from their situation, but they were until they had medical cannabis. So my capstone project is looking at evidence that it does help to alleviate the opioids use, addiction to opioids.
So do you mind if I ask you a policy question?
Sure.
About cannabis? Do you feel that the federal government and therefore maybe the state of New Hampshire should change its its attitude toward legalizing?
Absolutely.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
okay, all right, so the federal
So-
government's gonna have to take the lead on that.
Yeah, the crazy, so as part of the research community at Georgetown, they are doing research on synthetic cannabinoid, how do you say that?
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about.
Cannabinoids.
Yeah. And they can't, it's crazy because they can do studies on heroin and cocaine in their labs, but they can't
Okay.
use pot.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's crazy. Natural pot has synthetic pot is just, a singular strain or they, manufacture it, but natural cannabis has a lot more therapeutic qualities probably. They're actually doing a lot of work in Colorado with some of the, work with some of the children that have Charlotte's Web. And they've done a lot of work in Israel and things with.
Wait, say that
with
again,
it.
Charlotte's Web?
It's called Charlotte's Web. It's a certain type of epilepsy.
Really?
Yeah, and it's been very effective. One of the strains they found, they're doing clinical trials there for the use of this particular strain, and it's making, supposedly people are moving from everywhere else in the country to have their children treated in Colorado because they're able to alleviate the symptoms, which are very tragic, so it's very helpful.
I wonder with what you just mentioned about this particular study, do you know if they're, in that study, if they're going to compare this treatment with the cannabis to the kind of odd, I guess I'd call it a unique treatment, but it's been out for quite some time for epilepsy patients, which is the high fat, I don't know officially what they call it, it's like
Ketogenic diet.
Right, that diet. Do you
I don't know. The
as
only
a
studies
control
I've seen
group or
are
something, or-
controls, which are controls, and then the use of. I haven't seen them compare those two treatments.
Right.
I don't know if they could do that with 3 arms, but
I can just answer her question quickly. Because our grandson had epilepsy and it was treated with the ketogenic
that,
diet.
right.
But it was a particular kind of epilepsy called
Right.
Dru's. And so it works on Dru's, but
But
the
only on-
doctors at Johns Hopkins told us that it doesn't work on other types of epilepsy.
My mother
I-
had epilepsy.
I thought there was only one kind of epilepsy.
Yeah, me
That's
too.
it.
I did
No, there's a
too.
lot.
There's like 6 or 8 of them.
I didn't know why.
Wow.
Okay.
So it's more complicated than just.
yeah, and this particular type of epilepsy that's called Charlotte's Web that these
I never
kids
heard
have.
that.
Yeah, I can send you an article on it.
Are there more seizures with this
I don't-
Charlotte?
I don't know. I haven't studied that closely
Okay.
what the distinction is with that particular.
Okay.
But I could send you an article. I have
I was
it.
just
I
curious.
used it in school. I know, but I
Yeah.
just don't remember exactly what that was, what it
Okay.
was specifically. But
Didn't mean to get you off track, I know you
No,
got
that's okay.
a lot of things on your mind.
sorry. I know. I feel like I go on for way too long. So thanks for
That's right,
interrupting.
you're captive here, so we're.
Can you talk a little bit about the Coakley Landfill? I know how complicated it is, and we read the paper, of course, so we have some details. But I'm really curious as to what you think not should be done now, but what will in fact be done now that the sort of cat's out of the bag, as it were.
Yeah, well, there's a very strong lobby. So one of the bill, HB 1766, was a bill that I wrote that was intended to make them do something, which is what they were supposed to do from the beginning. And the bill passed, came out of committee in the House with a negative committee result, going to kill the bill. And we actually overturned that bill. We got 65 Republicans to vote with me to pass the bill. So, and that is, that's the kind of stuff that I think, I talked about it, I sort of touched on it, but that's because I worked with Republicans, I worked with Libertarians in the House, and they respected what I was doing, and so they came and they voted with us. So that bill passed to the Senate. When it got to the Senate, as I know, is a lot more apt to be controlled by lobbyists. The Coakley Landfill group hired 5 lobbyists to follow me in the House, and an attorney, Rath, Young, and Pignatelli. The 5 lobbyists I know cost $20,000 minimum. I don't know how much the attorney cost, but I'll bet you it's similar to that. So they have spent quite a lot of money just to thwart my ability to get that policy passed. So they heavily lobbied the senators, and they won. I still had a few Democratic senators, and Dan Innes fighting for the bill to replace it back to what it was, which would have made this active remedial system put in. And in the course of the right to know lawsuit that I filed, because they were hiding a bunch of information, I found that they took $5.25 million that was allocated to them, given to them by the Department of Defense in 1990, I can't remember the date, but 82 or something like that. They took that money to settle a lawsuit, a frivolous lawsuit that they had taken against one of the contractors that were installing the cap at the time on the top of the landfill. And I found a letter from the Department of Justice that said you are not allowed to use this money to settle a lawsuit, but they did anyway. And then they tried to hide it for 25 years till I found it. And so through the right to know request, I found a series of really important things. They only let me look at the files for like an hour and a half, but I found tons of info really fast. And
You have your phone, you take pictures, or
I have copies of everything.
Okay.
It sounds like a complete duplicate of Aaron Brockovich.
Yeah.
Oh, it is, right out of the record.
So, so now we're left with a situation where the lobby, they're just really, I don't know if you guys saw the movie Merchants of Doubt. You've got to see this movie because it
Have you
talks
seen it?
about
Oh my God.
how
Pull your hair out.
industry creates this doubt. They have a model for it. They did it with the tobacco industry. They do it with climate change. They're doing it with this now. And because these chemicals are manufactured by 3M and DuPont, they are very, very, very strong lobby. And they are lobbying in the state of New Hampshire. They fight all my bills along with the Coakley Landfill group. And it's because they don't want to be held responsible for basically putting chemicals on the market that in the 1960s that we know are not safe. And it's not easy to get them out of the body or the environment. So this is a big issue. Now we found out 2 weeks ago that there are 611 bases across the United States, like Pease, where drinking water is contaminated across the country. 611.
600.
Is Pease ultimately is it their jurisdiction? Are they essentially responsible for this land?
So they're partly responsible.
Okay.
So they bought out the $5.2 million back in 80, whatever. That was them buying out their responsibility for this issue, with the understanding that the groundwater treatment system was going to be installed. There's a caveat on that. So and it specifically says in the paperwork I found, if you don't do it, you're going to owe us some money back. So they owe the money back. If they never do this, they're going to owe the money back to the Department of Defense with interest. So,
Right, 1982.
yeah. Well, the interest rate's low for EPA
That's
stuff, but it's still a lot of money. I mean, and so I asked Bob Sullivan, how are you going to pay it back? Oh, we're going to assess the taxpayers for this.
Yeah.
And so, do they know this? So I've been trying to blow the lid on this
They
because
seem to be finding out. I mean,
they're finding out. Yeah.
Where were the checkpoints? I read it on your page and I was just flabbergasted. Were there no checkpoints during all this time that this has been going on? Nobody tested, nobody made any connection between the two?
Oh, well, I mean, there has been ongoing testing. It's partly because we didn't know that these chemicals, like I said, I only found out about them in 2011 on another database. So
I meant before you came into the picture. You know what I mean?
Right.
All
it was on the back burner. I mean, we forget things,
Cap it.
And
Cap it.
we had a habit of putting our trash in dumps. There are dumps everywhere. There's 150 of these unlined, under the bottom landfills across the state of New Hampshire. So it's only beginning to emerge, this issue. I hate to say it, but that's the truth. And we're going to find out that this is an issue. Maybe not as bad as Coakley, because Coakley in particular, there's 130 or so, I think it was, what's called responsible parties who dumped stuff in there. I mean, W.R. Grace, which is the civil action people down in Woburn, they dumped in there. Tons of chemical companies, auto manufacturers,
Big footprint.
everybody. Literally, somebody wanted to sue them. I had a private party, and they could not find an attorney anywhere in the Northeast that didn't have a conflict.
Oh my God.
So that tells you how broad this is. It's huge. And they literally could not find an attorney to represent them in the Northeast. So, these issues are concerning. These are, but the Pease issue, 611 bases across the United States have the same issue. We're talking about large national issues. We need to change how we approve chemicals for use in the market in the United States. Europe doesn't let you put them on the market until they're proven safe.
Right.
We say, put them on the market and then we'll see what happens.
I was curious about that because I had read, and I actually saw a documentary about this, on the TSCA laws,
Yeah,
which was you used to release chemicals, and then basically, when you found out that there were bodies lying on the ground, you were like, oh, maybe we
yeah,
ought to take a
right,
look.
after they're already there.
So it's, right, and the TSCA laws were properly so, guilty until proven innocent.
Right.
And my understanding is most of that's been repealed, right?
Yeah, I mean, it still
When did that
exists,
happen?
but they also don't, I mean, you know, like the PFCs, thousands of them were approved under like a loophole.
Oh.
So there's a loophole in it anyway.
There's a huge loophole, there's a gaping gap of loopholes. You know, and it depends, you know, it's somewhat controlled by industry. I mean, I think they probably influence quite a bit. I mean, there's a lot of industry influence in Concord, but in Washington for sure. You know, so we just found out 2 weeks ago that when, you know, all the stuff that we were doing, trying to do this PFC, lowering numbers, drinking water standards in the state of New Hampshire, we've been fighting. We're doing against DES, EPA. No, the standards are not low enough. You know, other states like Minnesota, New Jersey, Vermont, all these states have said that they need a much lower standard. Well, come to find out, the EPA has been holding back the release of these important health studies that say that the standard right now is more than 6 times too high, and they know that. And they've known it for 2 years. I contend it's been at least 2 years.
Legally, how can the EPA do, I don't understand.
Who's gonna do anything about it?
I thought
Right.
that
Me.
they had,
Okay,
and
but-
people first, I
but-
don't understand.
But that's not true, actually. So, you know, part of the work on the commissions that I've done, so one of my commissions that I mentioned was the most important one, actually, is the one where we're making the state Department of Environmental Services and Health Department talk to each other.
Yeah.
And their data. They do not want to do that. In fact, we had to put another bill in to make them talk, because they won't do it. They just sit there and they're like, yeah, and they just don't, they don't. So so this bill and this commission is making them overlap the health data and the environmental data. And that will tell us where we need to look for problems. And it's really, really important. In the process of my doing this work on the commission, though, I realized New Hampshire has the highest rate of breast cancer in the country. The highest rate of breast cancer in the country. Rockingham County is second only to Merrimack County. So here in Rockingham County, we have the second highest breast cancer rate in the entire country.
More than Massachusetts?
More than,
or
oh yeah, Massachusetts is way down the list. If you go to the CDC
the
website,
southern states?
yep, we have the highest rate in the country here.
I didn't-
And another one of my bills that just passed, actually the governor just signed it into law this week, was to make more stringent the level of arsenic in drinking water. Because in New Hampshire, we have lots of naturally occurring arsenic because of the geology of where we put our wells. So
Radon.
that's not but arsenic is very directly related to bladder cancer. We know that. In the course of my working on that bill, it was heard in a committee that Jackie Silly was on, and the state. So I found out that New Jersey enacted a standard that was half ours 12 years ago. New Jersey, okay? So if you go to New Jersey, you're going to have half the arsenic in your water that we have here. And so,
Most corrupt state in the
yeah,
union.
and Jackie Silly said, wait a second, why didn't you've known for 12 years that New Jersey has had a standard half of ours. Why didn't you do anything about it? And they have so our rate of bladder cancer here in the state of New Hampshire, 3,000 cases per million. So for every million people, there's 3,000 cases of bladder. It's a huge, usually the target is 1 case per million when you do
You got one right
exposure
here.
assessment. What's that?
You got one right here.
Right, oh, you
Really?
do too?
I have had bladder cancer.
Really?
Yeah.
Whoa.
Wow.
I had
And
no
there's,
idea.
it's alarming. So New Jersey has only 400 cases per million. So that's a big difference. And that's still too high, but it's still a big difference. So they said, Jackie Silly said, why did you guys not do this for 12? Oh, we just didn't get around to it. Literally, the State Department of Environmental Services man stood there and said, we just did not get around. Yeah, we've known about this problem. We just didn't get around to it. And she said, are you telling me that because we didn't have a scientific legislator that came here and made you do this, that you were not going to do it? Nope. So this stuff we talk about, it's not true. You know, we have to, we have to be more proactive about all these things because they're not doing it for us. So we need to be active participants in the government here in New Hampshire. Radon's another one that I'm gonna deal with this summer. I'm gonna write the bill and somebody's gonna take it in next, my friends are gonna take it in the fall, but you know, there are big environmental issues and we are suffering with cancer. I mean, we spent, if you use a conservative number, 14% of cases could have been prevented 12 years ago if we had done this, like New Jersey did. That's $65 million just in direct medical costs that we could have saved over the past 12 years. And that's only with conservative 14% of the cases. So that, you know, that's a significant of direct medical costs only. That doesn't include lost wages, that doesn't include, you know, pain and suffering of families that have to deal with a family member who is sick. So you're talking about major costs, all because they just didn't do it. And not even talking about breast cancer, so.
That's an example of the externalities, when you don't consider the other
Right.
costs
Exactly.
associated with
Yep.
something.
So one of my bills, and one of the things I've been trying to do every time I talk about one of these bills is, let's talk about the real cost, and I always do that calculation. Some of them are really hard to do, you can't really quite figure it out, but that one in particular was a pretty clear-cut case. The other thing I try to do is make them model, when they look at exposure modeling, when you look at like how stringent should we be, I tell them now, and one of my bills finally passed, it's hopefully going to be signed by the governor soon, that makes them use prenatal exposure and young children, because those are the most vulnerable. So that, and that is going to get passed. He says he's going to sign it, so that will be a huge change. And it's only one set of chemicals, but I think it'll be the the watershed for us changing the way we look at and preventing cancer in the state of New Hampshire. So
Has
I'm
he
hopeful.
been receptive?
You know, I have a good relationship with him.
Thank God.
I know he's, you know, I have issues with him, but
His father.
I ask him for a meeting and I go in there and he talks to me and, you know, he's very open to me. I mean, we did our filing the other day. It was the funniest thing. We had like all these volunteers with us.
yeah.
We did our filing, we walked down the stairs and there he is, standing there. I'm
In
like, "Hi,
jeans."
Chris." In jeans.
Yeah.
And he's like, he comes over and he hangs over, and it's a picture, a great picture that we posted of us talking. I mean, he's a very affable guy. You know, I get along with him.
Congratulated you. And,
Yeah, and
So
he
maybe
understands.
more approachable than his dad.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he's approachable. That doesn't mean
Yeah.
he's always going to do what we want him to,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
you know, he's definitely. And he's the water issue. He's very on this water issue. He's been very receptive to all these issues.
You know, Mindy, I'm so impressed with the work that you do, and the thing that I'm concerned about is that, I mean, who's going to pick up the ball?
I was just going to say, you now
When
you
you
can't.
go to Washington, I mean, who's going to be, I mean, you have such, I mean, I'm not trying to, you know, I mean, you have some specific skills here that, I mean, you've already helped the state of New Hampshire tremendously, and, you know, I'm just a little worried about this.
There's an old just.
Well, I'm just gonna
There's
have,
a gap
you know what?
there.
I'm just gonna have a bigger stick. That's all.
Okay, all right, I mean,
But,
you know, you can.
You know, I'm
It's
not
a
gonna
good
be
question,
gone. I have friends in the legislature.
Yeah,
They
I
all
am
work with
ready.
me. You know, Jim McConnell. You know, as much as people talk badly about him in our caucus, I do have issues with him, but environmental stuff, he is
Yes.
fantastic.
But the problem is personality. I don't mean to get into this because it's, you know, it's inside
Sure.
the house stuff, but
Sure.
he's a difficult man to get along with. And when he gets up to speak, people just say, oh no, not him again.
In the Democratic caucus, yeah. And some in the Republican, but he's still, you know, I still think working across the aisle is, you know, the way it
Yeah.
has to be. And that,
Well-
so I think, you know, I know there are certain things that are preempted federally that, you know, when there's only one scientist in Congress, seriously, like, this is a huge, 700 people have left the EPA since Trump was elected, minimum. That's
They're
old
just
information.
gutting that
They're
department.
gutting everything. So when you start looking at what is that going to do to the public health of our entire nation,
Yeah.
when you've got Pruitt, you know, talking about rolling back energy efficiency standards of cars, when he's taken $50 a night condos from the energy guys, you know, this is huge. And you know, I'm used to fighting the lobbyists here in Concord. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know if you saw, but like one of my pesticide bills, the pesticide.
Yeah.
No, that wasn't the one.
Not the school
The
one.
crumb rubber one
Oh,
on the
no.
playgrounds.
Yeah,
Seven
yeah, right,
lobbyists
yeah,
were flown in.
That was in our committee.
Yeah, 7 lobbyists came in to sit there and talk about the most outrageous things. So I was like, oh my God, are you serious? I mean, and some of the committee members believed them. I mean,
A lot of the committee members believe that.
yeah, absolutely. So, you
Or
know,
maybe they're being bribed.
of course, because each
Oh,
playground costs, you know how much it costs? $1 to $1.4 million, each one of those playgrounds. So they've got this ingenious plan to get us to take their hazardous waste and put it on playgrounds for our kids to play on. At $1 million, they get, not only do they, they get rid of their hazardous waste, but they also get $1 million each time they put one of those
They
playgrounds.
can't be that stupid. You have to figure they can't be that stupid, so they have to be taking a bribe.
The legislators?
Yeah, well, maybe
I don't
maybe
think so. I
that's a
think
falling
they're just
out
kind
of
of
the-
It's a philosophy, that's it.
Yeah, yeah.
What happened to that bill?
Got killed. Even though young women are getting cancer, certain kinds of rare cancer in their lungs from playing in these playfields. And it's not just women. It started out as a woman coach noticed it, and she has a list of 220 plus last time I knew of athletes, young athletes that are getting cancer from playing on these
It's
fields.
essentially ground up tires.
It is. That's all it is. So
Rubber
whatever.
dirt, basically.
Yeah, right. And so when they degrade, the dust gets,
Yeah.
and it's the goalies that are down low, like the soccer goalies, that get it all in the face.
You
That
dive.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Are you getting more support other than, the few individuals that you mentioned, for your bills? Are there, does it seem like there are people that are receptive? That might
absolutely,
not,
like I said,
Republicans and-
we had two bills that had to do with Coakley Landfill, and it was amazing what happened when they brought their they brought their attorney up to Coakley Landfill. I mean, people turned on them. They were like, "You guys are so full of it." I mean, I don't think you were in that committee, right? Which committee were you in?
E&A.
Yeah, you were in one of them. And it just garnered amazing support because we had Republicans that were just, their brains were on fire. And they were like, oh my God. I mean, I had Jason Janvrin, oh my God, he flipped out. He's like, you guys are so full of it. So I think, and then you explain, and so you develop a relationship. Absolutely.
It sounds like you brought this to the attention of a lot of people
Yeah,
for the
absolutely.
first time that were, just like me, that were clueless.
Right,
I was clueless until I read your page.
right.
And I was absolutely,
Yeah.
I was here late, but I know I had to get here.
Yeah, thank you.
I just can't believe
Yeah,
all this has been going on. And
Yeah.
the state that we were all told was
Yeah.
at the forefront
Right.
of the fight for environmental, and the people's state, New
Yeah.
Hampshire.
Yeah.
New England, the people's corner of the country. And that here, I always perceived New England as being pro-people and anti-corporate, corporate bribing or corporate interest.
Chicane.
Oh, if you go, so if you go and you type in Google Jim Roche and BIA and meet my name, and you will see what they do. I mean, they have been, the Business and Industry Association, oh my gosh, the top, one of the top BIA members is St. Gobain. And St. Gobain is the company that's responsible for contaminating like hundreds of wells in Merrimack, Litchfield, Bedford. They were so after me. I mean, they literally took out letters to the editor to personally attack me. They were in Senate hearings, each one of them saying, emotional, because I'm a woman. Because I'm a scientist, a woman. They're talking about how I'm emotional. It's not, I'm a scientist, I'm not crying on the stand. I'm telling you the science, and you're saying I'm emotional.
Because they can't attack you with facts.
Absolutely.
They say with
Exactly.
women especially,
Right.
when they can't refute your facts, they will find, I'm sorry, now I'm
No, I know.
emotional
Yeah, so,
about this.
well, go look that up. You'll love it.
Oh, I
It's
hear
like,
ya.
it's
And
great.
It's very courageous, and you've seen it in politics for all of history.
Yeah.
Men, a lot of
Right.
men will go after, they'll find a misogynistic
Yep.
route to
Oh,
go
yeah.
after a woman
Oh yeah.
who has better facts than they do.
But
or
Mindy,
who is a woman.
it's also, don't you think, besides misogyny, it's about really, really big money.
It's money.
Absolutely.
Huge
Because
money.
St.
You're
Gobain
right. You're
is,
correct.
and the stuff that I uncovered about them in particular, they came here from Vermont. They had that big release in Bennington, Vermont, the same thing. They came here with the stipulation that they would not have to put air emission controls on their stacks. So they closed up shop in Bennington. And there's also information about how they knew they sort of said, the groundwater standard has to be the same. It can't be, like Vermont went really low, so they got out of there. And they came here, and I found paperwork that talked about how they didn't have to put emissions controls on their stacks. So they literally came here to pollute and they were allowed to do it because the state of New Hampshire, DES, allowed them to do it. I mean,
Are they still doing it to this day?
absolutely. I am
So
fighting tooth and
yeah.
nail with the people, I have been, so this is so I had already been working across this whole CD1 district because these issues are not confined to the seacoast. So I had people from Merrimack and Litchfield and Bedford reaching out to me like 2 years ago. So I've been actively working with those people. And so I have very strong support now in that area because they know I had been, and there was no reason for me to do it. I was like, personally, this is way before Carol was gonna retire. This is way before any of this stuff, but I felt like my expertise, they needed my help to fight against all the negative, all this stuff, and it's all money. I mean, St. Gobain is, they are a Fortune 100 company, and they basically, this is what they do. They go around the world, they pollute until they get caught, and then they close up shop and they leave. They've done it in Lisbon, for instance. They do it in Milford. They did it. They do it everywhere. They just
And they escape punishment, I'm sure.
What do they manufacture?
They make like the Gore-Tex coating fabrics, coated fabrics. They make Kevlar fabric. They make all which is a whole other thing that I'm involved in too.
What towns are they in?
Merrimack.
Merrimack.
And they were in, I believe, Milford, but I think they closed up shop there. I don't know if they're anywhere else. I think there's one more, but I can't remember.
And New Hampshire's a small state, so they seem to know how to maintain a low profile too.
Oh yeah.
Like they don't,
Yeah.
So Vermont had kicked them out prior.
They closed up and left because they contaminated
Bernie won't let them do it.
No, they did, and they
Yeah.
contaminated massive areas there, but they're being held accountable there. So that was another big thing that, that New Hampshire said, we can't do this because it's gonna be a lawsuit. Because what they did was, they turned around and sued the state of Vermont. They also sued the state of New Jersey for going to lower levels.
Well,
for
wasn't that a
They
red
sued the
flag
state.
for those in New Hampshire? Wasn't that a red flag?
No, the state
then?
of New Hampshire didn't want to do anything because they were afraid we were gonna get sued. And I was like, we can't not enact stricter
Wait a minute,
standards
wait a
because you're
minute.
afraid.
So I'm thinking to myself, so DES won't lower some of these standards?
I'm the only scientist, right? And I'm working on issues that lots of people care about, not just Democrats. And we know there are at least 41%, I think there are more now, independents in the state. I literally had one woman come up to me last night in Concord and say, I'm a Republican, but I really like you, I'm gonna work for you. This happens all the time. I have Republican supporters, I have tons of independent supporters. So, I think that's what it's gonna take, is somebody that people know is gonna fight for them and does fight for them. And with my record, I think, that's the kind of thing that needs to be done. Somebody that works across the aisle and,
Sure.
And it's sort of actually doing the job now.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like you said, some of the things you were involved in before are outside of your state rep.
Yeah.
Go outside of your state
Oh, yeah,
rep district, but encompass CD1.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm sure you're well aware of the fact that one of the factors, and it's maybe only a small factor, in the high breast cancer rate is the fact that we're the second oldest state in the nation.
That is true, but the breast cancer rates and the bladder cancer rates are not necessarily
Age-related?
aged. No,
No, okay, they're not age-related.
no.
Because I was thinking that if breast cancer develops later, but I guess it
There's
doesn't.
a lot of young women with breast cancer.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yes,
A
no.
lot of young women. Yeah, I mean, when I say young, under 50, I mean,
Yeah.
I had a friend died of breast cancer.
yeah.
Yeah, going back to the issue of the playgrounds, that seems like such an obvious,
Sure.
like forehead slapping
Of
kind of
course.
thing. That I would think that the parents of children who are supposedly playing in these fields would have been up in arms about this like a long time ago.
Yeah, it was brought to my attention as a bill and Portsmouth people asked me to put it in because Portsmouth was looking at putting in one of these fields and they didn't want it. And so, it's not just the cancer too, it's physical hazards, like
Yeah,
this stuff gets really hot. Kids get burned when they fall on this stuff. This
Yeah.
is black tires, in the sun. And they play on it in the sun in the summertime.
And they get sick on it too, because they
Yeah.
inadvertently inhale and eat the stuff.
What about a class action suit? Is that possible?
Of course.
For
Anything's
these-
possible, but
for these playgrounds?
But so sometimes, so that's an interesting question, because I think most people don't know this. So sometimes I put bills in just because I know they're not gonna pass like this one, but I wanna educate people. I knew it would never pass, because I know the lobby is way too strong. We had like the tire fill industry, the polysynthetic fill, I mean, all these industry, I have a copy of, I started taking copies of every single sign-in sheet now because I wanted to know who the people were that were fighting the bills.
But we can storm Concord. We'll
Sure,
try it.
if
You know,
the
do
people
the
have the
old-fashioned
will,
way.
but part of it is educating people and
Yeah.
getting them to act. So part of it, like my bottled water bill I had this year, that bill, all it was to put arsenic, MTBE, and PFAS compounds on the label, right? It didn't mean anything, it just meant they supposedly already sampled for that stuff, so just put it on the label so we can have informed consumers. Oh my gosh, you would think it was the end of the world. The bottled water industry is so profitable. It is so profitable because
Sure.
in New Hampshire, it's the Freiburg Poland Springs thing in Maine, $200 is all they pay to use that water. They pump the water out of the ground, they put it in bottles, and they make gobs of cash.
Yeah.
Dasani,
Yeah.
Pepsi was one of the biggest oppositions to that bill. They came in, it was classic too, they were like, oh, and so somebody on the committee goes, where's your water come from? And they go, the city of Manchester. So basically they turn on the city of Manchester tap, which is heavily regulated, so municipalities in the state are more regulated than other states can be. And so that one, Richard Abel on the committee says, well, why are you opposing this bill? Because I would think this would give you a market, a leg up in the market, because your water is heavily, more regulated than some of the other places. So why aren't you actually supporting this bill? Because you could use that as a marketing tool. And they were like, wow. You know, they didn't want to do that.
Now you're worried about any water, you're wondering, what about any of the
Exactly.
water?
So the
Any
point of
samples?
that bill was when we have our drinking water contaminated, like we have in the seacoast and we have in Merrimack, which you turn to bottled water, right? But is it safer?
Yeah.
No,
Right.
because it's regulated by FDA, not the EPA. It's a food product, so it's not as regulated as your water in
And nobody
municipality.
knows the source.
And nobody knows
unless
this.
They trace it back to
Right,
each
and so
company.
if you look real close, you'll see, like it'll say maybe it's bottled here, there, or wherever. Sometimes, but there's no information about chemicals on that. You could buy, if you bought bottled water in New Jersey, because I told you the standard is
yeah.
for arsenic is
It's a lot
5,
better.
it's better than bottled water in New Hampshire.
So
So
we
for
are-
arsenic, so you can drink toxic water from New Jersey,
Oh my
and it
God.
might be better for you than New Hampshire
So we're
bottled
like
water.
the New Jersey of pre-New Jersey, or post-New Jersey.
New Jersey
That's
actually
what I
has,
say,
they have a very,
It's part of the slow privatization.
they have
of
a,
water supply, too.
a board of epidemiologists and scientists that do their work now, peer-reviewed work on how to develop
eye-opener.
it. So they actually are very good in terms of their drinking water
And
protection.
so many former New Jersey residents live here
Mhm.
because they thought
Yeah.
more people from New Jersey migrated to New Hampshire thinking the quality of life is better here.
It's
For
because of the
traffic,
taxes,
maybe.
that's why they
Yeah.
move here.
Yeah.
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
But I never knew, I cannot believe all that I've heard because of your page. I never knew any of this. I thought we were living in the place of the quality of life, the quality of health. Because that's what people in New Hampshire government was
Sorry.
protecting.
Right.
And that's
I
the
never
PR.
knew, I never knew.
I must say that we sincerely, I mean, I'm very, very sincerely hope that you get elected.
Absolutely.
Even if you don't, you've already done so much to represent us. And if by some chance, and I suspect that there's a pretty good chance, that all these chemical companies will pour enormous sums of money into whoever the Republican opposition to you is, assuming you win the primary and you go on to the general election. They will pour phenomenal sums of money into your
They'll take it a lot more seriously than if somebody else.
Well,
So you'll
Yeah.
have to let us know how to help
right, I
you.
mean,
Yes.
and
So this is a grassroots campaign. I am not taking industry money because they probably would give it to me right now anyway, so, but I think it's important. I think the people of New Hampshire appreciate that. I think that resonates with people. You know, like I said, I have support from not just Democrats, but I have support from independents and Republicans, and that is where, you know, we need to be. I think it resonates with people. We see incredible energy, you know, outpouring support. So I think this is the way to go, and I think we have to make a statement about what is wrong about our political system, and that's, if you don't do it, you're not gonna, you know, affect change, so.
And everything you were talking about, that goes beyond L's and R's, or
Yep.
D's and R's, you know what I mean? These are about things that, you know,
common
should,
sense.
yeah, I mean, everything is ideological now, but even this stuff, like drinking water and that, shouldn't really be ideological, and you're finding a
Right.
way
Right.
to make it not
Right.
ideological.
What do you-
Well, everybody has a family member who has cancer, you know, I mean,
Right.
it's not a partisan issue.
Right.
That's why Jeff Bradley signed on my bills. He knows the real cost of cancer. He told me when,
And do the right thing for the wrong reason, it doesn't
Right.
matter. Do the
Right.
right, you know,
Tell their
right,
own
right.
children. I wanted those
Well,
that
well-
oppose, what do they tell their own children?
Oh, they were just science deniers, some of them, you know, they just don't, there's no logic there.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a drone, during
Frontiers.
those floods over the, when Rye Beach was basically coming up over Route 1, I had somebody, when I was sitting in the house next to the two biggest climate change deniers in the house that's on the ES&T committee, I got it in my seat, and it's like this drone video of what's happening, and I go, do you still not believe in sea level rise, you know? And they're like, I never said there wasn't sea, I said, yes you did, I sat there for 3 days and listened to you say that in the committee, you know,
Have a
so don't
tape
tell me.
recorder,
Yeah.
have it all taped.
Right,
Yeah.
but Jeff Bradley, I had no idea about this, but my arsenic bill that just got signed by the governor, I was in the Senate, he'd never said this before, he signed on to it. Oh, no, he did it first, but then he took his name off because it was political. But then he got to his committee in the Senate and he sat there and he goes, yep, I haven't drank my water for 25 years because my arsenic level is 100 in my well. So
how
he
does
totally got it.
Right.
He has, he has bottled water.
Filter. I wonder,
Everything in his house. He could have put a filter in because he couldn't fit it or something in his house,
No.
but he has bottled water in his house.
I wonder if Brita filters,
No.
do they take, they don't help?
They really don't do much of
Not to that
anything.
extent.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when they get dirty, they actually are worse because it starts leaching the stuff back into the water, but it wouldn't do anything about these kinds of chemicals.
Is there any kind of commercial
Yeah,
product at all
there is,
that can take the arsenic?
Arsenic is reverse osmosis, yes, you can do it. And actually reverse osmosis is the same thing you need for perfluorinated chemicals, so it would do both of those
Wow.
things, yeah. But it's not, it's a, you know, expensive.
I was wondering, my mother was a social worker and I just remember what people told me when my mother was still with us. The rules that she had to bend, I can say it now, my mother broke a lot of rule and policy to help
Love it.
certain people, you know. So yeah, I know my mother would be sitting here right with me, listening to your topics, because it's, you know, my mom was the one that taught us to get in there and join up and be politically active. That this was the region of the country that taught us to do that. And that's why I'm so astonished that Alabama-like topics are going on in our Hampshire.
Alabama, we tied with Alabama for drinking water quality.
Yay!
Now there's a standard.
Story too, this past winter, they said that New Hampshire is tied with Alabama for the second worst drinking water in the entire country.
I never would have known this.
I didn't know that. Really? Oh my
Yes. I
god.
can send you
No,
that.
it took your page for me to, and this was like a slap in the face today. I
Sorry.
never, no, I just knew when I saw that, you know, the Dems notice that you all sent out, I'm glad you did. I didn't know this was happening, and I'm alarmed. I'm alarmed and I'm astonished at our New Hampshire. I'm truly serious. I cannot believe that this is happening in our backyard.
And the canary is unfortunately the kids who comprise the first in the state cancer cluster ever. I mean,
So tragic.
it's very tragic. I mean, I can't even tell you,
Shame
kids
on
have
them.
lost their lives.
I'm so
His
sorry.
parents are, you know, traumatized. And I know these people, I mean, they will sometimes help me in testifying in the State House if I ask them, but I never ask them unless I absolutely need. And then it traumatizes them for days after that.
I'll take him out,
You know,
Paul. I got him.
you know, there are kids that are hanging on for dear life right now, and so that's the cost of all this, you know, so we really need to do something to stop this, you know.
I agree. Let us know how to help.
Well, the key
Write
is,
checks.
right, well, the
Write
key is too,
checks.
for what I found is that everybody, money doesn't take outside money, doesn't take influence money, but then they get hesitant to vote for them.
They what,
Because-
James?
But then they get hesitant to vote for
Oh.
them. They support them.
Now Carol didn't.
Right, because can they win? You know, they see the amount of money that other candidates
of
raise,
course.
and it either is a foregone conclusion, or, you know, for some reason, they feel like they're wasting their vote if they don't vote for the person who's gonna win anyways.
That's just, I never
And
understand that.
if you're given what you say you want, you gotta vote for it. Especially in the primary, what do you get to
The
lose?
point is to support what's right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And you know, that's, I hear what
And
you're saying.
people have
I
gotten
know you're
awfully
right.
cagey and strategic about their
Yeah.
own vote because they don't want to lose, you
Right.
know? So if you don't like big money in politics, then when somebody steps forward and represents the antithesis of that, you gotta vote for it, you know?
Yeah.
And it just takes a lot more work too. It takes a lot more
Yeah,
work.
a lot more work, a
Yeah.
lot more, it's
Dogged.
very difficult.
Yeah,
But we are fortunate because we have so many volunteers. We basically have volunteer power. Now we have to start doing other things. We have to buy lots of lit. We're getting ready to, we're canvassing, so, I mean, you have to have a lot of lit for that. So there are certain costs you can't avoid. We just got an office donated to us today.
Oh,
It's in
excellent.
Concord, so it's not the best place for us, but at least it's an office for some people
Where
and
is
it's
it?
free in Concord.
Well, yeah, where?
It's
where-
not in, I don't know, I have the address, but I don't
Oh,
have it off the
okay.
top of my head yet,
Yeah.
but, so we're lucky that we have so many people supporting, but we do need support. I mean, this is not cheap doing this,
Right.
you know?
and she's running and serving in a role right now too in the legislature, so, you know, it's
It's a lot.
a lot, right?
But every bit of history is. No, this is wonderful that you're doing this.
Oh, thank
I'm sure
you.
you have a lot of very grateful people.
We do.
Ella.
Yeah, I never could have imagined that our own state had these deficits and these wrongdoings. But
Well,
yeah,
then you should run for office,
wow.
because we all need to get involved.
Yeah.
Right. It's not just about voting and,
Right.
and winning and losing elections.
Right.
I just kind of
Mindy,
thought,
when is the primary?
September 11th.
September 11th. So it's now, so July, August, it's 3 months.
Yep.
You got 3 months. You got a plan mapped out for?
We do.
Oh, good, I'm delighted.
Yes.
And you got this guy.
We have, yep, and we have amazing, Jackie Silly just endorsed at the filing date, and we have some other interesting, important ones coming up, so.
Oh, you obviously
Oh,
have
yeah.
have to continue to let us know over the next 3 months what we can do.
Yep. Anything you can do to help us raise money is helpful. We
Write
have a
checks.
filing deadline at the end of June, but anybody can reach out to, also like if you can send, what we're doing is we're asking people to send their friends emails, saying, you know, I support this person, please check it out, please help support, because we do have a June 30th deadline.
Okay,
This is actually a really important fundraising deadline because it's the last quarter before the primary, so.
that's right. All right.
Mindy, I have your permission to put this on YouTube, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think it's
What did I
instructive
say? I'm
too.
gonna get in trouble for?
Who, I think it's instructive too, you don't need to say who it is, and I don't even know what the number was, but who's leading in the, or how much money right now is leading in the fundraising right now? It's
$1
unbelievable.
million.
Over $1 million
Maura
already.
Sullivan, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Morris Sullivan is over $1
State.
million.
yeah,
All, almost 96% out of state.
out of state.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
So it's a holy cow, but it's also, you know, that's the kind of money that.
Yeah, but Carol did it with almost nothing, so it can be done. We
No,
know
no,
that.
Denver-
But I mean, that's the stakes. you
Yeah,
what
I know.
Is that you got somebody running with $1 million.
Right.
Yeah, the field is different this time, for sure.
Now, when Carol first ran, were there 3? There were only like 3 running, right?
Right,
First time?
3, yeah.
Yeah, okay. That was 10.
Yeah.
Good thing
Or
is
11?
to try to reach the college students too. The kids are getting very,
Yeah, we
very
have-
active.
We have huge support with millennials,
Oh,
absolutely.
great. That's
Now they just gotta show up.
Yeah, show up to vote, yeah.
Put the beer down, go vote.
Yeah.
Are you visiting the UNH campus?
Oh, yeah, we're
Yeah.
doing lots of campus outreaches, high school
Oh,
outreach, yeah.
good.
Yeah.